I'm thinking back to a couple of interviews, but one in particular where she discussed being privately messaged multiple times on social media saying, oh, you're a N-word, a Black B-word, we are going to come after you, you need to step down. And often it is these school board members who feel like they can't serve in this role anymore or quitting or not running for election again. They're often one of the biggest links to the communities, especially particularly communities of color, low-income communities, and the district. And then what does this mean for when it comes to equity and our children of color, low-income students who are really relying on these voices? I think that our long-term impact of that is going to be awful and disastrous.
Joining me today is Associate Professor Carrie Sampson. She is the Professor of Leadership and Policy in the field of education at Arizona State University. And I know a lot of folks that I've been talking to have a lot of questions about what's going on nationally when we're seeing all these attacks on school boards, we're seeing attacks on book lists and curriculum, African American history, but also specifically educators. And I've been tracking, if you've been following the news, there's school boards that are coming in and getting rid of superintendents or getting rid of principals, or in Florida saying they're going to target teachers who teach the wrong things with felony charges. So I thought, well, I wanted to talk to somebody who really understands maybe on a national scale what's happening and really get some perspective on this. So with that, I'd love to hear, what is your specific expertise? What are you looking at in terms of your research, and what are you starting to see nationally?
Yeah, sure. I got into the field of research and education from an equity lens. I started studying school desegregation, which led me to an interest in school boards. About a decade ago, I started studying school boards, trying to understand how they address policy and practices when it comes to minoritized students. And from there, I've kind of moved into different spaces around school district reorganization, open enrollment policy, all coming back to the ideas around equity and how do these entities, these players, develop or push or advocate, support, not support policies around equity in education. And so, yes, of course, the last couple of years have kind of become almost a perfect storm, a collision of events that has brought the idea of school boards and school district governance to the surface at a national level in ways that I haven't seen, except in my research around school desegregation in the 1960s and 70s. I think that was the last time school boards, I think, were really in the spotlight in this way. And so I appreciate your interest in this. Come at this topic from the perspective, I'm doing a couple of things. Right now I'm in the middle of a study focusing on school board members who identify as Black, Indigenous, folks of color, and really trying to understand what their experiences and perspectives have been on sitting on school boards across the country, which has varied quite a bit. I also am looking at how the media is framing these issues. How they frame school boards, but also just how are they framing these issues that are happening at the school district level when it comes to communities, to see kind of the targeted attacks at school districts. And then I have started to, with some colleagues, make some more broader connections to the privatization of education and how this movement has influenced that movement on a broader level.
So specifically, what are you seeing as far as larger scale patterns when it comes to who's getting targeted or, for removal, or where these controversies locally are happening? Is there any patterns that we can see as far as north versus south, or large cities or small cities, or even specifically in terms of which educators or which school board members are being targeted?
Yeah. And I can speak a little bit based on my data around school board members that I've interviewed. And I have taken note that there is often more targeting happening in more suburban school districts where, you have the lone one or two Black or Latinx maybe school board member on the board who is kind of the leader for equity issues. For instance, we have 3 Black women on school boards in suburban districts that have been highly targeted death threats. One had to hire security to protect their home, and it's a single Black mother, and concerned and afraid, and to the point where she ended up resigning from her position on the board after a few months of constantly going back and forth, having to file, police complaints, etc. One of the other school board member decided not to run again for reelection. She said it's exhausting and she can't, continue to do this type of work and be, constantly targeted and harassed and threatened. Others had talked about being, the first Black female or to be a school board member in that district and the experiences they had with campaigning, particularly around the 2016 election and then the next one, and how just volatile that was, going house to house in some of these neighborhoods that were very blunt and explicitly racist. And so she had to gather protections and support to even campaign in some of these areas. And again, that was from 2016. So it's not like this is brand new, right? I think this has kind of been a trajectory of an increase that has gone on in the last several decades.
Can I ask, you mentioned 3 women. Is there a pattern between women and men, or is it because maybe there are more women on school boards? Is there gender involved in any of these attacks, do you think?
I can't say for sure, but I know some of the comments and the attacks have to do, there are comments around one woman's, her, body shaming her. So yeah, there seems to be some connections, I think, to gender. I think probably understanding that these women are probably in a more vulnerable state, and so I think there are probably some connections around gender. There are also slightly more, depending on the district, more women serving as well. Folks generally, like school board members, come into the position because they have some kind of connection to education, where they were a former educator at some point, or there's a lot of mothers who've gotten involved. I mean, we see this on like PTOs. PTO I'm involved with, my kids' schools. One man who sometimes shows up. Other than that, it's mostly mothers who are doing this work and this labor. So it could just also be the fact that, there probably are more women serving in these roles.
You also talked about narrative. So you're looking at the experience of educators who are serving in these roles, but then you said you're also interested in these narratives. What do you mean by that? And can you expand on that?
Yeah, I have a team. As we were doing this project, looking at school board members of color, we also started collecting several hundreds of news articles. And a team of researchers and I started to do analysis around what was going on with the National School Board Association following their letter to the Biden administration, where they were asking for federal kind of support and protection against some of these threats that were happening to not only school board members, but teachers and families that would come to these school board meetings. And so we wanted to understand what was the narrative, what was happening, and in addition, you have issues of SROs, which I think precluded even COVID issues around masking, and then the anti-CRT sentiments. And so we've looked at COVID again, anti-CRT sentiments, and SROs, and the NSBA letter. And what we found, we've concluded the analysis around the NSBA letter. A couple of things we found in that analysis was that there was this narrative about war. There's a war between us and them, parents and school districts. And sometimes it's not very clear which parents are we talking about. So to get, the school boards are at war with us. Well, they're usually affluent, more conservative white parents we're talking about as at war. And so the media has kind of gotten onto that narrative. Another thing we found is kind of a disinformation and inaccuracy of the way that the letter portrayed the issue and the terminology of domestic terrorism. In the actual letter, the letter writers had said, these kind of attacks are similar essentially to domestic terrorism. And this is part of why we're asking for federal support. And that was taken, by social media. We also looked at tweets, social media outlets, news outlets, as the NSBA, the National School Board Association, is calling parents domestic terrorists, which was not accurate. And that was, again, cycled through multiple levels of media in a way that just, portrays this misinformation. And I think it's important that we understand how these narratives are created, what this actually means, and how it just really validated the need for protection for educators who are and were being attacked on a regular basis.
Just on that note,
yeah,
you're actually researching people who are getting targeted, and to the point where they're not running again or they feel unsafe, which is what I heard you say. And then there's a narrative that says, that's basically twisted what the National School Boards Association letter stated, which is we need help and support for people who are serving because there are
Mhm.
people who are getting threatened, which you've mentioned your research confirms. And the narrative is now saying, oh, you're saying parents are terrorists. And that's a
Mhm.
twisting of the truth. So without giving any specific details on individual people, how bad is it? How bad has it gotten for some? The other side is saying that the National School Board Association is blowing up these claims of attacks on folks who are serving in our school boards. What are some of the dangerous, or they're saying that they're being terrorized? We know we need support. What types of activities have people told you about in your research?
I'm thinking back to a couple of interviews, but one in particular where she discussed being privately messaged multiple times on social media saying, oh, you're a N word, a black B word. We are going to come after you. You need to step down. You need to recuse yourself from these certain conversations. I mean, a lot of, and, these anonymous threats to the point where this particular board member put together her own social media page trying to garner support and throw this out because, she wasn't getting support from her district. I think this is part of why the national organization, I'm not sure exactly if that's why, but I'm sure, multiple incidents like that probably led the National School Board Association to, prompted them to do something in terms of asking for federal support because a lot of these school board members were not getting district level support. There was other incident where one school board member got onto the board later and he put out emails about the only black school board member on that board saying that she was a thug and police hating and several community members then showed up in droves at the school board meeting to threaten her and to dismantle any kind of equity issues that district had been working on, and again to the point where these threats led her to put a restraining order against this person where they couldn't show up at the board meeting anymore, but still felt like her and her children were in danger. And so, there are several, and this is just the small set of data that I started collecting nationally. You can see that even across in different news articles. Not only school board members, there's school superintendents who are, like you mentioned, are being fired left and right and threatened and pushed out of school districts, like in Cobb County, I want to say, is it North Carolina, South Carolina, where they hadn't even brought her any. They hired a black female superintendent. She hadn't even started before they pushed her out. And so, yeah, it is a tenuous situation. And, I think ultimately, so you have these lives who are being threatened, right? And then what does this mean for school board governance and school district leadership when it comes to equity and our children of color, low income students who are really relying on these voices? And if they're not going to be able to serve in these roles, I think that our long-term impact of that is going to be awful and disastrous.
So let's talk about that. Ultimately, people who serve on a school board, a lot of them don't get paid. These are voluntary positions, and they should be treated with at least a baseline of respect, just as humans, but also because they're serving their communities. And in some cases, they're being elected by constituents to oversee a school district. But even putting that aside, their primary purpose is to support student learning and to help support families in supporting their children's learning. What do you see as the implications of this when it comes to students and their parents? And also, I guess the other question is, when I'm hearing you speak, I'm also hearing about patterns. These aren't just random folks that are getting targeted. I'm hearing that there's a pattern of targeting parents of color, but also folks of color who are serving in these roles. Those are the folks that you're studying. But that a lot of these folks are now being prevented from addressing equity issues, or I'm hearing there's kind of a confluence between the two, right? Is there a pattern of the work that these folks are doing or the works that they were elected to do? And then what are the implications of that on students and families?
Yeah, I can hypothesize, I think, what the implications are. We'll see, I think, soon enough. And we are starting to see some implications in terms of policies and practices at the classroom and school level. But I think what like I said, what I did see is several districts had pretty solid equity plans that essentially got dismantled and new boards either came on or particular parent or community groups. A lot of folks who come to these meetings too, who are critiquing these equity issues, don't even have children in the district. These are folks who are just, coming and saying, okay, we don't want kids to be taught this and that. And so, or we don't, we didn't approve this equity plan. This equity plan wasn't together during open meetings, and therefore this should not be in place. So there's a lot of arguments being made, right? And so you have these equity initiatives that have now several of them just have stopped, been dismantled, and when leadership is fired or let go, you also have this inconsistency of leadership, which leaves the district really struggling to figure out what is the direction in terms of growth, not just with equity, reading initiatives, math initiatives, other learning opportunities, right? And often it is these school board members who are feel like they can't serve in this role anymore, or quitting, or not running for election again. They're often one of the biggest links to the communities, especially particularly communities of color, low-income communities, and the district. And so when you don't have that link to, and that governing support to address inequities that your children or your child might be facing at a classroom level, that creates a lot of harm for our kids and our families. And so I think that we're going to see various types and levels of implications to what's going on at this point. And I think, unfortunately, given the pattern and the wave, again, not going to know exactly what is happening for years to come, what has happened in terms of how that is going to trickle down to outcomes and equity work and creating school and district climates that are welcoming and embracing to all children.
And so for community members now that are seeing this stuff happening, wanting to get involved, what advice do you have? Are there folks you've talked to that have been able to organize resistance to these changes or support school board members or school leaders that are trying to implement equitable practices in schools?
Yeah, I have. Luckily, I've seen organizations build out of different teacher movements, different parent movements, and luckily they've kind of seen the importance of these issues, right? So I'm working with one organization that is proactively understanding how school boards are so important. So they're delegating different people throughout the state to attend school board meetings. Okay, you're going to attend school board meetings here, you're going to attend school, and keep an eye on what's going on. We're going to identify folks who, whenever there's an open position or in elections, we're going to identify people who we know support public education, who support equity, and we're going to help support them into these roles as school board members. I've also seen organizations create like a pipeline training for community advocates who are interested in serving on the school board and other areas, right? And so that is really heartening. Actually, that's a recent initiative I've seen at the state level that has been going really well. And they're working across states with different folks who have been doing school board work for a while or were former school board members, and helping to train and support and provide continuous support for people in these positions. And so I think that has been really great. I think that in terms of what's trickled down, and also I think scholarship and research has increased in this area. And there are places like the National Education Policy Center who has been offering and presenting a lot of work in terms of, and hopefully work, and they're translating it into pretty simple like reports and stuff that community organizations can use, that community advocates can use to push equity agendas at their district level or at the state level. And I think it's important to note that we're combating like these local arenas, but also state laws. In Arizona, we just recently passed one of the biggest universal kind of voucher systems in the country. And it's a huge move to privatize education. And it's an unfunded, they don't even know where they're getting the funds. And it's millions of dollars that are being taken right now from public education that is going to have a devastating effect. And so a lot of these organizations are beginning to understand that this isn't, local and state issues really do collide, and we have to keep an eye on both.
So what do you think we should be reading? If I'm an average person, I know you're a researcher, so you're used to reading pretty dense, thick, and deep, research articles. But if I've been following this, I care about education, and maybe I want to share information with other parents on my PTA or in my neighborhood, what are some things that I could be reading to become educated?
Yeah, there's a book called A Wolf at the Schoolhouse Door, The Dismantling of Public Education and the Future of Schools, Jack Snyder and Jennifer Bigshire. And I think that book offers like a good overview of what's gone on in the last several years. And it's not too academically, but it's more informational. And I think it offers a good context. There are some reports coming out, like I said, of the National Education Policy Center. And I do think they do a good job of translating it to folks who are on the ground and doing this work in really digestible ways. I think there's a lot of good podcasts out there. Yours is one of them, but I also there's one by a colleague, Terrence Green, and he's kind of made it his mission. It's called Racially Just Schools. He's made it his mission in the last couple of years to again, put this research and scholarship into very a digestible manner for the broader public and educators, parents. There's another one called Leading Equity by Sheldon Inkins. He's, I think, lately done a really good job of pulling in academics and helping us to say things and share our research in ways that can be meaningful for communities. And of course, I mean, I've also come across some great journalists who are highlighting these issues. Nicole Carr has been putting a lot of pieces together in the ProPublica, I want to say. Is it? Yeah.
Article on the educator who was kind of run out of Georgia.
Yeah. That was a great piece. I think she's working on a piece right now about folks who got arrested at school board meetings. And she's an investigative reporter, and she puts a lot of time and research, I think, into her pieces. So there are a few, I think, really solid journalists that have been following this as well.
Great. And then what can we be doing? So I always believe in education and in action. What are some simple things? You're a parent yourself on a PTA. If you have neighbors, what do you tell them that they can do to help support? Because some of these things feel so overwhelming at the state level. How am I going to change that? But I do believe there's things that everybody can do. And what advice do you share?
I agree. It's simple, but it's also complex getting involved at the local level. Like I often feel like this stuff is happening around me. What am I doing? And so I got involved in the PTO at my children's school. I got involved in the local organization that I talked about. I thought hard too, like, is it that I can offer? I've gone door to door, helping get petitions signed around this voucher situation. I also got involved in the Arizona Alliance of Black School Educators, which are mostly teachers, but, I came on and I'm like, what kind of research help kind of form the positions we take as an organization? So we're putting together statements that we're getting co-sponsored with our local NAACP organization and various other organizations to push to state legislators to say, okay, this is where we stand on these issues. And if we need to come in and do testimonial opportunities at the state level or at the local level, I think we want to be able to position ourselves as an organization. I think you can't do this work alone. Like, you have to connect with organizations, community-based organizations, parents, educators, policymakers. And so figuring out what it is that you can contribute. And I'm a researcher, so I always think, like, what research can, even if I don't do the research, can I connect you to the researchers that are doing this work? Or can I pull up these things out of our library and we can have these or can I facilitate a book reading on this to help inform folks about what the context is? And so what it is, you have to identify what you can bring to the table. Who are the organizations, who are the players that you need to be connected to stay informed and to put policy in practice in a way that will advance equity in our areas and push back against what's happening. I mean, I always talk about, rather than just being reactive, we need to be proactively reactive. Like, we know it's coming. These things come in ebbs and flows. Like I said, this is not the first time, we've experienced this. School desegregation. I mean, you had the parents who were leading bus outs and, all these, there were white parents who were very organized against desegregating schools. And so this is not anything new. And so just being prepared that this is going to happen. There's always going to be pushback, I think, around equity issues.
Well, I really appreciate having the opportunity to sit down with you. And I'm also very grateful for the work that you're doing and look forward to hearing more as you collect more research and talk to more folks. I'm interested in hearing what the findings are. So please keep us posted. And then, maybe you can come back or we can share, I'm trying to share information like you as well, so people can be informed. And I'm very interested in seeing what your findings are.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely share those. Thank you.
Excellent. What I really appreciate about this conversation is being able to see that this is a pattern that's going on, and it's enough of a pattern that it's worth researching and studying how it's playing out nationally. So folks need to understand that this is not just a lot of incidents, this is not just a lot of organic occurrences, that there are patterns that we're seeing and that they are being supported by a larger infrastructure. And it is having impacts, not just on educators, but also on students. There's a strategic quality to the folks who are being targeted, and the people that are being removed are the folks that are standing up and speaking up for education justice. They're the ones that are implementing systemic change in their local school districts. They're the ones ensuring that equity audits happen, or that diversity and inclusion procedures are followed, or anti-racist trainings happen. These are the folks that are doing the work. They're the ones who are being targeted. So it's really important for folks to get educated in their local neighborhoods and their areas, and find out what's going on in your local school district, and find out how you can support, protect, and defend the work that's going on as a result of George Floyd and all these protests. And additionally, how you can protect the people that are in these positions, because we can't expect people people can't do the work if there isn't support and protection. And these are regular folks that serve in these roles in school boards. They are often volunteer positions, and they need your support.
Just Talks is written and produced by yours truly, Allie Collins. I'm an educator, writer, organizer, and parent. I'm making this video so we can get educated and take action to protect our public education system and advance education justice. This podcast is free, but it's not free to make. If you would like to ensure that I keep producing more episodes, please visit my Patreon at patreon.com/Allie Collins Production. Support my guests by visiting the links in the description below, and please like and share this podcast video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to see new episodes of this podcast when they're available. And if you want to share clips from this video with your friends, hit the thumbnails below.